Tom, we're interrupting our usual schedule to report that Conservative MP Sir David Amess has been stabbed in a major incident at his constituency surgery in Leigh in Essex. The MP for Southend West was holding a surgery at Belfairs Methodist Church in Eastwood Road North. A man reportedly ran into the church before the MP was stabbed several times. A large emergency presence has been spotted in the area with a police helicopter overhead. Joining us now is Tom Harwood, GBNews political correspondent. Tom, it's far too early to compare this with incidents involving Joe Cox in 2016, but there will be grave fears across Westminster, across the country, for David Amess, a long-standing Conservative MP for Southend.
There will be. David Amess was first elected in 1983, and he's been a recognisable face. He was a leading Brexiteer, and of course the Basildon moment in the 1992 by-election, back when Sir David represented the seat of Basildon, was the biggest moment of the night that Neil Kinnock thought was when the 1992 election was lost for Labour and won for the Conservatives. Sir David has been a staple of the Conservative Party for a long time. Obviously, reports are unclear as to how he's doing, and our thoughts have to be with him and his family at this time. But we need to look at this incident in the context of the last 12 years. Back in 2010, there was a similar incident where the Labour MP Stephen Timms was attacked at his constituency surgery by an Islamist extremist. He was attacked after having voted for the Iraq War. In 2016, Jo Cox was both stabbed and shot on her way to her constituency surgery in the run-up to the EU referendum. And of course now, just 5 years later, Sir David Amess stabbed at his surgery. I think there'll be many questions that many MPs are asking about the safety of events where MPs interact with the public in well-advertised and open settings like constituency surgeries.
We're just trying to piece together some of the facts, Tom. We can only report what we know, of course, particularly in situations like this where lives are obviously under threat. We know David Amess was stabbed several times. And as you say, there seems to be a cycle here. In this country, we pride ourselves on access to our MPs. The verb to lobby comes from the fact that everyone has a right to meet their MP in the central lobby of the House of Commons, of course. We have this first past the post system, which for all its failings means that people really know who their MP is because they vote directly for them, unlike in proportional representation systems. And you mentioned there Jo Cox, you mentioned Stephen Timms. I was thinking back to when I was doing your job years ago in the early 2000s. I remember the assistant of a Liberal Democrat MP in Cheltenham, Nigel Jones, was killed by a member of the public. There seems to be a cycle that we go through, and every time we say we really should increase security around MPs, but then the sort of natural instincts of the British system, which is to make your MP available sitting in a church hall, sitting in a community centre, sitting in a leisure centre, facing constituents, comes to the fore. And you know David Amess, I know David Amess. He is one of the most open public-facing MPs in the Commons, known for it. And now it seems that very openness, that desire to be connected to his community, has been thrown back in his face, quite literally.
Absolutely. You would regularly see Sir David on College Green opposite the Houses of Parliament talking to the media, particularly through those Brexit years. And he was always willing to engage with protesters as well. So clearly someone who believes in the sort of the open and accessible form of British politics. I have to say that some changes were made in 2016 after the murder of Jo Cox. There were panic buttons installed in some MPs' houses. Some MPs decided to not conduct in-person surgeries for quite some time. Indeed, some started to do in-appointment-only surgeries. Whether or not those changes have sort of fallen by the wayside as time has gone on, as people have been excited to be together again after all of the COVID-related lockdowns, I'm not so sure. But clearly there will be reviews, there will be big questions, and there will be a sense of questioning as to how accessible our MPs should be. This being the third similar incident in just over a decade does suggest that there may need to be reform to the system by which MPs voluntarily choose to offer their services to their constituents, perhaps moving to an appointment-only system for many rather than these walk-in surgeries that are so common for so many MPs who like to be local MPs, who like to know their constituents, who like to walk around their constituencies. Perhaps that may need to change.
I think we can see some pictures from the scene now, Tom. The police are being obviously extremely careful with the information they release. Our GBNews colleagues in the newsroom are doing everything they can to find out more information. We don't want to broadcast anything, of course, that we don't know absolutely to be true. We do know that David Amess is receiving treatment at the scene. We do know he's been stabbed, quotes, multiple times. We do know he entered the Commons in 1983 and is a relatively elderly gentleman, albeit a sprightly one. I mean, when I think of David Amess, Tom, I'm sure you've come across him in the House of Commons. He's a big character there. I don't just think of somebody who took a big role in the Leave campaign, which he did. I talked to him over the years many times about animal welfare issues, about pro-life issues. Like me, he was raised a Catholic. He's very proud of that. He went to school in the East End of London as a kid. He really is one of those kind of bootstrap, working class blue Tories who came up through the party during the period of Margaret Thatcher, and he's aged into, hasn't he, an extremely valued member of the parliamentary community with real friends and admirers on both sides of the political aisle.
Oh, absolutely. He's seen as one of the most campaigning MPs there are in the House of Commons. He'll get on to a cause and really champion it, whatever that cause may be. And of course, he has some very, very close to his heart. I probably came across him most during those Brexit years, but of course, you're absolutely right to note that there are so many other causes that he very passionately cares about. And of course, that generation that he represents, that's that area of both sort of Essex and London, that borderline area that became so synonymous with the Margaret Thatcher revolution, where sort of those traditionally working class areas became solidly blue seats. It's one of the reasons, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, that his seat of Basildon was considered to be that bellwether seat in 1992. The boundaries have shifted a little bit now, but back in 1992, if anyone watches those election results back, it's Basildon that everyone was waiting for. That was seen to be the first Tory brick that would fall, that would indicate Neil Kinnock becoming Prime Minister. Well, the Tories held that seat. Sir David Amess won it in 1992, and that really cemented the sort of change that the country had been under throughout the 1980s. Sir David clearly a huge part and a very important block within that change, a block of those new blue seats in East London, in Essex, in that sort of new wealth-generating area, the real symbol of Thatcher's market revolution that delivered so much prosperity for so many people. And you're right, we shouldn't be speculating in terms of what has been carried out. We know that there have been some previous attacks that have had motivations. This may have had a motivation, it may not have had a motivation. We, of course, at GB News will wait for any official confirmation before we broadcast that. But it is important to note this in the context of the safety of MPs, in the context of similar events that have happened in the past. And looking around it, we will be looking towards the future in terms of what may be done to change the system in which MPs so easily come into contact with strangers and members of the public.
It's interesting you mentioned Basildon Man, Tom. You weren't even born during that election. I remember it well. He was seen as a kind of standard bearer for this new conservatism, almost a kind of classless character or a class fluid person, bringing us out of the kind of class-ridden dogfight politics of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And Basildon was that key seat, the equivalent to Ohio in a US general election. As you say, we're being very, very careful not to report anything that we don't know. We're hoping for the best, of course, in terms of how Sir David Amess is faring, having been attacked. Police are telling us he's being treated on the scene. He has received multiple stab wounds. We've literally just got this statement from Essex Police, which I'll put to you, Tom. A man has been arrested and officers are not looking for anyone else. Interesting development. Obviously, we know somebody was seen running from the scene of this.
We do know that, and we know that local press reported that there had been armed police officers on the scene as well. Clearly a swift response from the police, and clearly catching that what appears to be, or at least the police are saying, was a lone wolf attacker, is clearly a very significant development. Catching that attacker alive as well, clearly an armed and dangerous individual, good to be taken off the streets, but also let's hope that we can find that motivation, that we can find what was behind this and help to prevent similar attacks happening again.
Tom, we're going to move on in just one moment to GBNews Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White, who will have been doing everything he can to find out what's happening. But before we do, let's just think briefly for viewers, what will be happening now in government? Clearly, this is no longer a regular political day or political week. Whatever happens to Sir David Amess, clearly the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister will be heavily involved. The Prime Minister's obviously away, but this will certainly interrupt his holiday. What's happening behind the scenes, Tom?
Well, fortunately for the Prime Minister, last night is when he returned to the United Kingdom, so he will be able to be in Downing Street monitoring this situation. I'd be very surprised if National Security and the National Security Council hadn't been contacted by the Prime Minister, and that a careful eye were being kept on this situation. I have to say, I haven't seen any statements yet from the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition. Those may come in the next few minutes. We'll keep our eyes out and, of course, bring them to the viewers of GB News as and when they happen. But yes, of course, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, potentially, I think that because this is a lone wolf event, it appears that the police have said they're not looking for anyone else. There may not be a Cobra meeting called in response to this, but there certainly will be keen eyes, statements, and much, much hope and prayers.